So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them.
Welcome to First Issues. It's another year, another crisis, as the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, imposed tariffs on all imports into the USA. No country was safe, as all those in trade with the land of the free were hit with different percentage tariffs, including our very own Botswana. Following much outrage and a stock market crash, President Trump announced that these tariffs will be paused for 90 days. This applied to all but 3 countries, with one in particular, China, being the clear point of heavy focus. At the time of filing this report, the USA had a 145% tariff on all Chinese imports. Not taking it lying down, China imposed 125% reciprocal tariffs on all American imports. In response, luxury brand manufacturers out in China decided to get on social media platform TikTok to air out these brands' trade secrets, including but not limited to the actual costs of production, which raised questions as to why the retail prices of these brands were so hyperinflated. As it all unfolds, what does it mean for us as Botswana, and exactly what are tariffs? We have this conversation with Economist Gomolemo Basele. Gomolemo, thank you so much for coming on First Issues and affording us your time. We're here today to talk about the Trump administration's imposed tariffs, right? But let us understand, what are tariffs in this context?
Great, thanks for having me on the show. So essentially, tariffs represent a tax or a duty that's applied to goods that are either imported or exported by a country. So the intention behind putting or applying tariffs is to try and protect the nation's industries from competition that's coming from abroad, as well as possibly even allowing the government to collect a bit more revenue if these or some of these products are inelastic to price changes that are applied or that result because of the tariff.
So there's been a supposed trade war currently going on between the United States of America and China. Unpack that situation for us. Of course, it didn't start as just China and the United States of America. It was a global, for lack of a better word, want to impose tariffs on every trade partner that the United States has. So please unpack the situation for us in the simplest of terms.
Thanks. So you're absolutely right. This trade war has essentially been there for some time. So we've seen instances of the USA as well as China imposing different taxes on goods that are basically transacted between the two countries. And this has been extended to other countries, as you mentioned, the primary ones being China, Canada, as well as Mexico. And the reason behind this is that they run some of the largest trade surpluses against the US. So the intention from the US standpoint is to try and reduce the size of those surpluses to get to a point where basically the trade balance is almost nil, which should allow industries within the US to also perform better than they have been, especially along the lines of what's been listed under the critical imports list. So automobiles, I'm sure you've also heard, as a key one, as well as various technology elements as well. So essentially, the US is trying to reduce its trade deficit with the rest of the world, as well as support local businesses in terms of plugging in some of these activities or producing some of these goods that have traditionally come from abroad.
Well, like you've been saying right now, the war is between China, Mexico, Canada, of course, started by the United States of America, and the rest of the world essentially. President Trump said, "I'll put a pause on the tariffs that we've been wanting to impose on you." Nonetheless, this is a war that is happening between some of the largest economies in the world, and I would like for you to maybe share how that might affect us as Botswana.
Okay, so the list, as you say, extends to basically all countries across the world, with some of these tariffs being paused. But if they do come back into effect, the impact from an ex-USA standpoint is that it will reduce growth prospects. And then from a US standpoint, it's likely to be inflationary because now you're forcing your consumers essentially to buy goods that were produced less efficiently than if they were imported. And then on the other hand, it's growth negative in the sense that now the demand for your goods, especially from a US standpoint, has now been reduced because of the higher tariffs that have been applied. So the global impact is that it's likely to drag growth down with it. It might be growth positive for the US in the short term, but in the longer term, it's growth negative, as now basically the inflationary impact will eat away at any growth prospect the US is likely to get from this. The rest of the world essentially has to find alternative markets for their goods, which, like you say, might impact a small or medium enterprise locally. So because China, for example, is sitting with goods that it would have otherwise exported to the US, it's positive for a small business locally in the sense that those goods might come to Botswana at a lower price. So that's part of the positive impact in the short term. But and then obviously if other markets don't appear for China, they're likely to pull back on production. There's also outside of any other issues that they have from a consumer as well as property standpoint within their local market.
So essentially, I mean, I hear you talk about the short term and the long term, but if things do not go back to what is considered normal in the sense that, to the normal tariffs that were in existence before this, what are we likely to see happening beyond just a negative growth prospect or a positive growth prospect in the short term?
In the longer term, or medium to long term, I think we're likely to see growth basically registering a lower average than we've seen historically. And the reason for that, if we take Botswana as an example, we've had tariffs imposed on us as well by the US, but the direct impact is quite minimal. And that's because we export very little to the US directly. Where the real impact is likely to be is where now our goods go first to another nation for processing before they make their way back to the US. So this includes India, for example, which is a key processing hub for diamonds, and they've had taxes imposed on them as well. So the impact is likely to be reduced demand from an India standpoint, which then feeds back to us as reduced production from a mining standpoint. So the impact basically is negative for everybody, given that the US is a major consumer of various goods and services. So if they close off their borders, then there's less need to produce as much as we have previously.